Welcome to Northwest Profiles, a look at people, places, and events of interest in the inland Northwest.
Fixed on a hill, rising above the shimmering waters of Hayden Lake in scenic northern Idaho, is a grand three-story house, once named Honeysuckle Lodge. Today it is simply known as the Clark House. For nearly 90 years, this beautiful white mansion has endured, while those who built it, who once called it home, and who later abused and nearly destroyed it, have all come and gone. In many ways, this historic estate, now one of the top bed and breakfast locations in the country, serves not only as a wonderful passageway into our region's elegant past, but also as a testament to the fortitude and patience of California transplant Monty Danner. It was his vision a decade ago that would lead to the preservation of this valuable piece of inland Northwest history.
Actually, then I was looking all over the country to do an inn, but I wanted to find an area that I felt was, we could incorporate corporate America. I'd bought a couple of places in Florida, and the same weekend that I was buying property in Florida, my oldest son, Mark, happened to be in Idaho for a friend's wedding, stumbled across this place, took some photographs, brought them back to my office and said, "Dad, you've got to see this place in Idaho. It could be wonderful." And to humor him along and get a good father and son weekend, I said, "Sure, we'll go do that." So we flew up and stayed at the resort, and I spent 2 days here, and after a couple of days, the magic bit me.
What Monty and his son found and captured on video wasn't pretty. Once the largest and most expensive home in all of Idaho, the Clark House was merely a shell of its former self.
It was overwhelming. I walked through the double front doors. There were no doors there, of course, because they'd rotted away. The floor was about to fall through the basement because the snow and the dampness had gotten into the floors. And as I looked at the reception room and looked at that magnificent staircase, the first thing, the ceilings were falling in. There was a huge scorch where fires had been set in the middle of the hardwood floors. The original Italian marble had all been stripped away, and then they had brought chainsaws and cut the newel posts and the banisters out. And as I walked from room to room, you had to get past that first feeling of madness to start seeing the potential and the beauty that was here. And by the second day, something showed me that this could be magnificent. And I was able to get past it. And fortunately, I am a visionary. This one almost blew me away, but I am a visionary, and one of my gifts is the ability to be able to see things as they should be and not as they are.
Yet despite his optimism as a visionary, it didn't take long for Monty the realist to admit that this project was going to be more than he could handle on his own. So he immediately set out to entice Rod Palmer, a former business associate and successful insurance agent from San Francisco, to join him as a partner. Understandably, Rod was apprehensive at first, but then Mother Nature stepped in.
To be honest with you, the San Francisco earthquake, the quake of '89 scared me to death. And I thought, man, I can't go through another one of these. That was one part of it. The other part was I did see the potential. I knew that, and the insurance business was good to me, but I felt I didn't want to do that for my whole career. And so we started looking at this place seriously. And Monty was ready to get out of corporate America, and so he packed up his bags and loaded up the truck, and in November he moved up here into the kitchen to start this project. I would come up periodically and work on it until June of '90 when I moved up here also. And then we really started going full throttle.
As the renovation of the Clark House began in the fall of 1989, Monty was motivated by a strong desire to create a successful business and, in turn, a new life for himself. However, as time passed and Monty had time to reflect on what he had purchased, he soon found himself driven by much more than dollars and cents.
Once I bought the property and started researching, the history just was absolutely fascinating. I couldn't let it go. It was cold here that first winter, and I would leave and go to the Spokane Library, and I would spend my nights going through old newspapers and records, and I uncovered what I think is one of the most wonderful, beautiful, fascinating, mysterious histories that the Northwest probably has.
Monty's research revealed that the house was originally built in 1910 for prominent Spokane businessman F. Lewis Clark and his family, including wife Winifred and their only child, Theodore. Born into affluence on the East Coast in 1861, Lewis was educated at Harvard, and in 1884 moved out west to Spokane, where he made his fortune in milling, mining, real estate, banking, and lumber. Lewis and Winifred were married in Spokane in 1892, and shortly thereafter built their dream home on the city's south side and called it Undercliff. Today, the home still stands and is known as Marycliff. In 1907, Lewis' love of sailing led him to purchase a yacht, which he christened the Spokane. Later that year, the Clark family would sail to Europe to compete in the 1907 Summer Regattas, an event that would eventually compel Lewis to build a mansion on Hayden Lake.
The final race was against Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. They lost the race to the Kaiser. He invited him to first to the palace in Berlin, where a huge banquet was presented in their honor, and then he invited him to his summer palace. Today it's known as Insil Mainau, and there the inspiration was born for this particular property. This house is not the castle that property is. However, it overlooks a lake. It's built on a U-shape. The gardens are magnificent. And Clarks came here in 1910, bought 1,400 acres, and completed the house. Shortly after that, they sold their mansion, Undercliff Mansion in Spokane, and moved into this as their main residence. When this house was completed, it was the largest and the most expensive home in Idaho. Putting greens and tennis courts, 150 acres of landscape grounds, private zoo, a riding academy, dairy and pasteurizing plant, guest houses all over the landscaped area.
Unfortunately, the Clarks' party on the lake didn't last long. Less than 4 years after moving into their Hayden Lake home, F. Lewis Clark, on January 16, 1914, would mysteriously vanish into the night near the Clarks' winter home in Santa Barbara.
It was international news. Every newspaper in this country carried the front page story of the disappearance of the Spokane millionaire F. Lewis Clark. Winifred waited for several weeks, offered huge rewards. At one time, 10,000 people were on the shores of Southern California searching for his body. After several weeks, Winifred returned here to this house, and she waited for 8 years. At the end of 8 years, she lost the property. Everything was sold at auction. Louis Davenport of the Davenport Hotel bought many pieces, including a wonderful globe of the world carved to Winifred Clark from Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and of course it was a congratulatory gift on her new home here at Hayden Lake. She moved to Spokane, lived there for many years. She died in 1940. Her estate was valued at $10,000, and of course she had been one of the most wealthy women in the Northwest.
During the long 67 years between foreclosure on the property in 1922 and Monty Danner's rescue of the estate in 1989, the Clark house would experience its share of good times and bad, while the 1,400 acres that once surrounded it would nearly all but disappear.
By the time I bought it in 1989, there were only 8 acres of land left with the property. Of course, the Navy used it for a time. It was used as a hotel, a small hotel, then as a restaurant. The restaurant was doing pretty good. Unfortunately, the old septic tanks were not doing as well. The drain fields were gone. There wasn't enough property to expand it. The health department shut it down, and it sat for almost 20 years until we bought it in 1989.
After years of neglect and the ravages of both Mother Nature and vandalism while it stood vacant, it was apparent from the start the restoration of the tattered Clark house was going to be a significant challenge for its new owners.
People had taken 60 sets of the windows, and all of the door hardware were gone, so the house was very accessible. It was a process, I think, of securing the property, getting the systems back into place so that we could eventually start with the cosmetic aspect of what we were going to do to put it back together.
Throughout the project, certainly as a compliment to Monty, is he's always had this philosophy. while we were doing this project, that we get some project done on a daily basis, no matter how big or how small. And it's been a very successful philosophy.
Today, after a decade of hard work, all the original beauty and charm that made this home such a fabulous place to be when it was called Honeysuckle Lodge has been fully restored. From its elegant hand-picked furnishings to the magnificent wall murals painted by the renowned scenic artist Jack McCullough, this National Historic Landmark, known as the Clark House on Hayden Lake, offers anyone who visits the perfect getaway. It's precisely what the former corporate executive Monty Danner had in mind, once struck by the magic that is the Clark House.
I'm really excited about what's happened. This whole project has gone in 2 stages, of course, the renovation and protecting the property and researching the history and developing my appreciation and sharing the importance of the history. The other side of it was I'm a working guy and I needed to develop a business so that I could get some of the investment back that I've put into the project. And I think that what we're doing for today's world is absolutely the right thing.
We truly have created a sanctuary for our guests and people who come to see Clark House to reconnect with themselves, reconnect with their partners, and sort of reinvigorate themselves after a stay or after a dinner or what have you.
The grandson, Lewis, came here in November of 1993. With the help of Harvard, I found him, and he came with his wife and his daughter. It was as though the Clarks had finally come home when he came, and he's visited a couple of times. The last time he left, as I waved goodbye to him, I finally felt like it was our property for the first time, and they gave it back to me, finally. But Lewis and Winifred, I think, would be very proud of what's happened here, and as we learn more about them and can share more about who they were and their accomplishments, I think that the history will certainly enchant and excite and make people feel good about what's going on here.